Hi, everyone. My name is Kyllie Jansen from Keys Job Center. Thank you for joining us for another Wisdom Wednesday. Today's conversation will be about talent attraction and retention in the competitive market. And I'm joined by my colleague, Jaclyn Nadon, who will introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Key's Human Resources Manager. I started just a while ago, and I'm so excited to be supporting all the wonderful individuals at Keys, helping our clients through settlement and job seeking and helping employers in this area.
Yeah, and we're hoping that with Jaclyn's background in HR and my background supporting both job seekers and employers, sort of making that match as a job developer, and that we'll be able to sort of honor both sides of this equation, both in terms of what job seekers are looking for and some of the challenges that employers are facing right now as well.
Exactly. So today we're going to talk about why talent retention matters now. We'll also go into the local labor market, employer branding, flexible work and benefits, upskilling and career pathing, inclusive hiring and DEI, and then we'll go over some of the key takeaways. So I'll let Kylie start it off.
Yeah, okay. So the big question is, why does retention matter? Why is talent retention so important right now? In short, it's because the game's changed. We've had some very significant events happen in recent times, and some things happening now that have really changed the way that employers are recruiting and the way that people are looking for work. Some of the big ones are, of course, were post-pandemic. So the pandemic really gave people a different sense of what that work-life balance looked like, and what was important to them in terms of valuing those pieces. We're also looking at, for those of you who may have joined me for the first Wisdom Wednesday, we talked a lot about generations in the workplace. Gen Z's influence is really significant right now, and we're soon to have a 5-generation workplace that really changes how we work and the values that job seekers are bringing to the employment world. We're really looking also at AI is coming fast and furious and really changing how we work. It's affecting everybody's work lives in different ways, which is really changing how people are looking to what they're looking to start with, but also sort of how their job changes throughout their career as well. And so we're really starting to have those conversations with employers around retention is expensive and it's costly. And we really need to have strategies upfront early on and ongoing conversations in order to ensure that we're attracting the right talent, but really focusing on that retention piece. And that's what today's conversation is going to be about. Jaclyn and I are hoping to give you some real tools, some real examples, some things that we've seen work for employers in this community.
Yeah, and that's so true. I feel like, Kylie, so much of it is about attracting the right talent, right? And I'll talk about that a bit later. Are you attracting people whose values mesh with those of your organization, who are going to want to stay there for the long term?
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings us into our next point, which is, what does the labor market look like right now? We're seeing a lot of changes in terms of the way we're doing work. I mentioned AI, but we're also starting to see some changes in terms of the type of work that people are doing. Kingston's facing quite a number of layoffs right now of highly skilled workers. These are workers coming with very transferable skills, but these are the workers who aren't, we hear a lot about, when we're talking about retention, about, especially the millennial generation is going through many, many jobs, right? And maybe only for 2 years, 3 years, kind of at a role, if even that long. I have a lot of employers talk to me about, even if they can keep somebody for a year, that's success at this point. But these folks who are experiencing layoffs right now, many of them are coming from that background of, I've been in a job for 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, and that job no longer exists. So what are other job opportunities out there that I can access? And are employers posting roles that sort of line up with those skills? And does that make sense for me? We're also seeing, sort of a change in morale, right? With the high interest rates, with inflation, people's housing costs are very high. Going to the grocery store can be quite quite a deflating experience right now. And so we're starting to see the impact that that has on people when they're looking at, the type of work that they want to do today and the type of work that they want to do, in 10 or 15 years. So, the big ones, of course, in Kingston are housing costs. So, can I afford to live in Kingston, or do I need to live outside of Kingston? If we do live in Kingston, maybe that works for me and I have an opportunity, but is there an opportunity for my spouse? Do we need to talk about sort of a hybrid opportunity? Costs in terms of commuting, that's becoming more and more challenging for a lot of our job seekers. And then, of course, the childcare demands is another big one that we hear from job seekers, not only in terms of costs, but also in terms of, can I access childcare and what does that actually look like? So, further on in the presentation, we're going to be talking about flexibility, but one of the big conversations around flexibility is, does it work for my life in a family situation when there's kind of all these other moving parts? One of the other big things in terms of the pool that we're looking at in terms of the labor force is that education has really changed. So, of course, in Kingston, we have both a university and a college, and they're in the news a lot in terms of changing programs and changing focuses, and that it's becoming a little bit different in terms of accessibility. So there's, people might not necessarily be able to afford to go to university, but I think it's more than that. I think it's that conversation around, do I have to go to university? Do I want to go to university? I know so many young people who think about, older cousins or aunts and uncles who have just gone through post-secondary education, maybe even did a master's or a PhD, and then sort of struggle to find that success point. And so these are also young people who probably finished high school in a pandemic online. And so the way that they value education is really different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And so really looking at self-taught, or are people learning through YouTube? Are people taking courses through MIT or LinkedIn Learning? So having those conversations around micro-credentialing and, what are some other ways that we can learn, and what are some ways that we can do that within the workplace once we already have somebody engaged? So I think these are some of the big conversations that are happening sort of in that labor force. Would you agree, Jaclyn?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think looking at those type of things when you're hiring, right? So as we move into employer branding, talking about inclusive hiring, that type of thing, as we will later in the presentation, are you just looking for that specific pathway through college or university that maybe people aren't doing anymore? Is there someone with a kind of different background that you could look at, different experiences that they could bring to the role? So I think being very open to difference in that as well is super helpful for employers. So let's look at how you can kind of brand your organization to reflect the values that you want and to reflect who you are in the community. So promoting pay transparency and total compensation. So as we know, this is becoming a legal requirement, but I think that from a recruitment standpoint, it's really beneficial to all parties. When candidates know what to expect, there's less opportunity for confusion, miscommunication, and then nobody's time is wasted through mismatched expectations. And this doesn't mean that candidates won't, or that they shouldn't try to negotiate their wages once they have an offer. I would always recommend that, but it will usually mean that negotiations are reasonable. They're based on numbers that kind of connect with what the organization is willing to offer, and that people have a common starting point. It's not going to be so far out in left field that you'll never be able to get there. So transparency goes beyond this as well. And I know for a lot of employers, talking about pay, talking about money, it can cause them anxiety. And I hear employees in different organizations talking about how maybe they're shamed for discussing their pay. Employers don't want them to do it. But we have to realize that this is a normal thing that people want to discuss, and it does have its place. And our aim as employers shouldn't be to stifle the conversation, but to create an organizational culture where we can justify pay. So if you're just starting out as an employer or a small business, it can seem like a tall order, but it's worth aiming for as like your ultimate goal and striving to have that transparency. So at Keys, we like pay grids and scoring based on job descriptions, and this is really, really helpful. So consider something like a simple pay scale and a job rating system, and try to be as transparent as you can be about its implementation. So a lot of the complaining around wages seems to come from feeling like others are getting more, that one's being taken for granted. And unfortunately, we do live in a world, and I feel like social media exacerbates this, where we're pressured to compare ourselves to others all the time. And this isn't just for teenagers, right? This is for all of us in the workplace. We're looking at other people, we're looking at the lavish lifestyles that they're presenting online and thinking, oh, well, I'm not paid that much. But it also happens in the workplace. So transparency provides the reasoning behind wage differences. Then on top of this, we want to move beyond only talking about wages. You want to think about total compensation, full compensation. So what are all the ways that your employees are rewarded for their work? And this can include things like extra holidays, little perks, benefits, even company culture. So how do you contribute to your employees' wellness and their work-life integration? So trying to move away from that idea of work-life balance where we have like a scale, and if we take from one part, we give to another. If we're giving more to our work than we're taking from our life, we're thinking more about integration where, I'm taking a wellness walk at my lunch. I'm working to make myself feel better while I'm doing the best I can in my role. So just really kind of trying to view our lives as something holistic and not separated into these two spheres of work and life, right? Our work is part of our life, and we need to live it and enjoy it as much as we can. So it kind of suggests when you think about work-life balance that you can't have it all. And again, well, this is lofty. I think as employers, letting our employees have it all, quote unquote, kind of needs to be our goal. We want employees to make choices and have opportunities that contribute to their wellness while they're at work. So this means having trust and giving autonomy. It means so much to trust your employees. And it's such a huge thing because we've all likely had that experience of working somewhere where we are not trusted. And I think in a lot of cases, like when I look at my dad, who was a small business owner, I think this was one of the reasons he said he couldn't have a boss. Because he'd had too many bosses where it was just like they are watching you all the time and everything you do is monitored and evaluated, right? And I think we've all had that experience in some capacity. So employees want employers who trust them and who know that, if you're having a moment, if you're not working at your best, you'll make up for it another time. Say you go 10 minutes over lunch, then you'll stay late another time. And there's just that inherent trust that your employee will do the right thing. So we need to believe that employees know what they need to do their best work. I believe wholeheartedly that most people want to be successful at work, and not in terms of climbing some kind of corporate ladder, but just to feel as though they've contributed the most that they can contribute. I think sometimes we think of people as lazy or they don't want to do things or they're trying to like get out of doing work. But I think most of us want to feel good about what we produce and what we put out into the world. And so say you need to take an impromptu walk at 2 p.m. to get over a post-lunch slump. We need to trust that people will perform well, and they will if they're given that opportunity, right? People know what they need to do their best work. They know when they're going to be in that wellness headspace where they can perform effectively. So I feel like number one is don't hire people you don't trust. This is one of the reasons why values and company culture questions can be so important in recruitment. So really lean on your values, know your values, which I'll talk about next, and try to suss out like whether people feel the same way as you, whether they are trustworthy and you believe that they will give their best. So when you give them room to do what they need within reason for their own wellness, I think they'll usually find ways that help them perform their best. Then let's talk about company culture. So yeah, we hear all the time that people are clamoring for jobs. And Kyllie and I had talked earlier about this, and there's this strange disconnect, right? Where people say they need jobs and employers say they need workers. And we can't really figure out how to kind of combine those two things. But I think the issue is partially that candidates aren't just looking for any job. They want certain types of jobs where they're respected, valued, trusted. This isn't necessarily the best paying job. So pay as much as you can as a general rule, but be aware of the total rewards that your employees get every day in the form of culture. So sometimes employees will leave high-paying jobs where their aspirations and their humanity aren't respected. So let's say you've stamped your values on the front wall of your office. That's great. But how do you live them? If you can't give concrete examples of how you do this, then you aren't doing it. So do you say you stand for respect and or equity, but you don't pay a living wage? Maybe it's time to reassess your connection to that value. And this doesn't mean we all have to have the same values. Your organization should be authentic to you as a community. So consider digging into what's really important to you, not just the leaders of your organization, and be aware that you will attract and retain those with whom your values resonate. So think about whether you really want that cutthroat perfectionism value. Is that really going to get you the candidates and then the employees that you want working in your organization? Is that going to build the company culture that you're looking for? So, social impact and community reputation. Another thing we want to consider is your values become your calling card in the community. So, how you treat employees resonates with candidates and customers. And we probably all have places where we won't go because we've heard bad things about how they treat their staff. I know I have. So don't let this be you. Attract customers because they can tell that your employees are comfortable and content being at work. And be the type of employer and who empowers managers, who empowers people on in your front facing positions to notice if someone's having a hard day, to notice if a different employee is having a difficult time, and to offer them suggestions for improving their wellness, or taking a little break if that's possible, putting another server to cover for a server who's swamped. Just thinking those little things, being involved in what your employees are doing, listening to them can go a long way. So you want to use testimonials, social media, and community involvement. Now that you have your values, where does this lead you in terms of community initiatives that you might want to be a part of? So recently at Keys, we've done Pride. We have Emancipation Day coming up that we're really excited to have a booth at, right? And these help to indicate our values, and they indicate them to the clients we have. They help our staff kind of live their own values. And so they offer all those opportunities for your customers, clients, employees to feel like they know who you are as an organization. It's a great way to attract talent and loyal clients and customers. So social media strategy plays into this. Are your channels lighthearted, or are they super professional? And this lets prospective candidates know what they might expect if they join your organization.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I really took from what you were saying was you used that word authentic, and you also used the word trust. And I think we're starting to see, more and more of our clients coming in and saying, I want to work somewhere where I feel really good, right? And pre-pandemic, 10, 15 years ago, flexibility definitely meant things like I got to go pick up my kid from school and I'm allowed to do that, or I can do that without feeling guilty about it. Whereas now we're really looking at that flexibility and that fit, I think, is really the word, means so many things. And just as you were saying, Jaclyn, about the company or the organization providing a forward-facing look that matches who they are, that authenticity, I think we're starting to see clients do more and more of that as well. And job seekers are going in and saying, okay, the interview is as much about me presenting myself as it is about me figuring out if I actually want to work there. And they're kind of flipping the script a little bit. And that's another thing that we're really seeing in terms of that labor pool really changing. And that's actually a good thing for employers, because you want somebody to want to work for you. You don't want them just to perform well in an interview and not necessarily feel connected to the work it is that they'll be doing, right? And so I think sometimes the challenge around conversations around flexible work and benefits can be, for employers, can feel almost like a pick your own adventure, right? It can be like, oh, well, there's so many different people with so many different things that they want or things that they need. Do we have to have this sort of very exhaustive list? And everybody kind of piece it. It can feel daunting, I think, is what we're hearing from a lot of employers. But really, when we break it down, I think ultimately what job seekers are looking for is that conversation, is that, can I talk to you about these things? Can I be my authentic self? Is it okay for me to have a less than 120% day? and because there's all these other things going on in my life. And so there's lots of different ways that employers can do that. Remote work is something that we're hearing a lot about, and not everybody can do that. Not everybody can do remote work or flexible schedules. If there's things that you have to do in the office in a lot of workplaces, but maybe that flexibility looks something like, my kid has to be at school, for 8:30, and I can't afford childcare in the morning. I have childcare for the afternoon though, but my kids don't get up till 8, and I'm up at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. So maybe I can check emails or do some of those administrative tasks that I need to do from 6 to 8, and then when I get in at 9, I do all the things that I need to do to be present physically in the workplace. Or maybe it looks like something like a job share. This is something that a lot of employers, it was really popular in the 80s. I know that my mom did it when we were young, things like that, but it's starting to come back as a concept because there's all sorts of people who may not necessarily be able to work a full-time schedule. And so I've seen recent examples of, folks who are retiring who really want to stay in the workforce. It's good for their brain. It's good for their social life. They've committed and they're feeling really loyal to an organization. And so they want to stay, but don't necessarily want to commit to a 35 or 40-hour work week. Where on the flip side of that, you might have somebody who's younger, who's still working, who's still going to school or studying or has other things that they're doing, who wants to kind of is just starting out and wants to sort of dabble and learn. Really learning, I think, is the really important word there. And so that would be a perfect job share. They could share the hours, they could share the tasks, which solves some of those challenges around flexibility and time and that kind of thing. But it also brings a richness to your organization. You've got these different working styles. You've got new education and new ideas coming in from the younger person who's still studying. And then you've got that experience and that loyalty and that mentorship piece from somebody who's, looking to retire in a couple of years. Another perfect example is, two women coming off of maternity leave, who, have families at home and are looking, maybe they know each other or could know each other, and support each other in terms of that work life. Like, so they have similar skill sets, they can do the same job, they sort of split that job, but then they're also splitting those child care duties as well. So they're building community, which also enriches their lives and means that when they're working, they just feel stronger and happier and more engaged. So I think these are some of the solutions and some of the ideas that we can come up with in terms of meeting people where they're at and helping people connect to the workplace and still have all these big, beautiful lives around them as well. Jaclyn did a really good job of explaining some things around, mental health supports, different things that wellness programs, walking at work. I know a couple organizations that do walking meetings. So if it's not a confidential topic, then you can walk and chat at the same time. Looking at those full compensation packages and having those be very transparent at the beginning. So I think one of the things that often happens is that an organization might have those things, but a person coming in doesn't know that those things exist. Or what we hear a lot from clients is that the organizations has those ideas and those policies and those programs, but people who have been working there for 15, 20 years don't necessarily honor those policies. And so, if you have a 1 hour work lunch, and that's the policy, is that there's an hour for lunch, and you're expecting people to leave and go and walk at lunch, but 60% of your workforce just sits and works through their lunch, and that's sort of the culture that has been established, and that's the expectation, then that doesn't necessarily align. So again, that transparency and that openness and leading by example, and really being able to balance that flexibility with equity and across kind of the board of different types of employees that you might have.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important part, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but it's about embracing difference in kind of all of its forms, right? And that's how we embrace equity as well. And I know I used to be a teacher, and one of the big things was, well, why does, Johnny get to do this and I don't get to do this if I'm taking a test? And, there's kind of that. And there needs to be kind of an acceptance of that in the workplace as well. Like maybe, so and so needs something that you don't need, or they need to do things a little bit differently. And kind of being very open to that as employers and as employees, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that that openness and that conversation around what people need and learning, definitely brings us to our next point, which is upskilling and career pathing. So this is something that we're hearing pretty much every day from job seekers, right? One of the most common things we hear for somebody who is currently working and just looking for a change is, I love where I work. I really like the people, it's close to my work. I can walk, or it doesn't take me long to get there. But I've been there for 2 years or 5 years, or whatever the situation is, and I just can't see myself doing this for another 5, 10, or 15 years. And so that's where that idea of, okay, well, what else can you do within the organization, and what other professional development opportunities exist that could provide that sense of fulfillment that doesn't necessarily relate to exactly what you're doing right now. So the idea of, meet me where I am and help me get to where I'm going, or help me grow as I learn and change, and as my life changes. And I think sometimes when we talk about upskilling and career pathing, we often get stuck in this idea that, oh, that means management, that means leadership. Everyone wants to be a supervisor, and we only have, one or two of those positions. And so we can't provide that, to everybody that comes in. But I think what it really is just finding different opportunities to do things. And so looking at different ways of learning and growing. The idea of learning and growing is a retention tool that is really underused. I find this when I talk to employers. It's like, this is the best thing you have. You have all these programs, and you have all these training, and you've got people that can apprentice, and you've got these different skill sets within your existing labor force. That's your retention tool. Grow that, share that. And so things like mentorship programs, lunch and learns, job shadowing, these opportunities for people to kind of learn from each other and to share that expertise within your organization. One small example could be something as simple as, if someone's going on holidays, perhaps somebody who has the skill sets but hasn't necessarily been doing that role could do some training, cross training, and could sub in over an extended holiday period, or just help sort of at busier times. So they have their usual set of responsibilities, but then during a certain time of the year, or that they kind of jump into this other role. Or it could be the idea of it's not necessarily a leadership opportunity, but maybe there's committees or organ or things like that within the organization. So health and safety joint committees, for example, is a really good one that a lot of different employers are starting to utilize, because that comes with certain set of training. It comes with an expertise. There's a global sort of group or organization around it that supports each other. There's additional things that you can do to support your organization without necessarily leaving the role that you're in that might be crucial. So I think these are just some small ways that we can really utilize that upskilling and career pathing. But I think the most important part of that is that it's that it's transparent, that it's equitable, and that it's attainable. Because if this is happening only because you know about it, or if only the outgoing, very charismatic people are getting those opportunities, or if you only get it because you sort of fell into it, or you ended up working too hard, and you were picking up all these additional tasks, and then you just sort of ended up accidentally with this leadership opportunity. That doesn't necessarily build that culture that you're looking for. So certainly having those conversations really early on, and helping somebody see their path and see those opportunities are visible and attainable is really the trick to that.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads us really well into the whole idea of inclusive hiring and, transparency throughout the hiring process, because you really want to start that relationship off like as soon as someone's a candidate, as soon as there's someone looking at your organization, you want them to know what you stand for, who you are, what you value, what's important to you, and, the type of person who would be happy working there as well, right? So let's talk about bias-free job descriptions. If it's possible to be fully bias-free, but we'll debate that another time. So try to look at all job descriptions with an accessibility lens and a lens for difference. So what is actually a bona fide requirement for this job? Does this office worker really need to lift 40 pounds? How often does that actually happen? And can you overlook this requirement if someone is skilled in other areas? So one of my major pet peeves is driver's license requirements. People need to stop doing this. So fine, you need someone to go to multiple sites, but someone who doesn't drive for whatever reason, so maybe they have low vision, maybe it's something else, these individuals likely have different ways of getting around. So it's not up to us as recruiters to decide that getting to our workplace is, quote, too difficult for someone who possibly has a visible or an invisible disability. This is for the candidate to decide. And so if a person is living with a disability, they might need to do things a bit differently, and we should embrace and support this as employers. And ultimately, as I'll talk about later, this gives us more diversity and perspectives within our workplaces, and in turn signals to clients and customers that we support and celebrate them as well. So I've heard various employers spend a lot of time worrying about what they can't accommodate, but it's so much more fun to think about what we can accommodate. How could this job be done differently? How could the position look different? And like Kyllie said, how could we make it more flexible? How could, could two people do this position? Could we accommodate different things? So sometimes it takes a little bit of imagination, and that's where experts like Kyllie at Keys can help guide you through this process. So yeah, Keys, we can help with that. Sometimes just having another person come and look at the job description and say, well, this doesn't need to be done, or this can be done in a slightly different way, or, this is a new idea that I've come up with to help you like get this done in a different sense. That can be really, really helpful. So for the interview process, as Kyllie was saying before, we want this to be transparent. I'm a big fan of having everything written down as policy, but be sure that you leave room for accommodations and advertise this in your job posts, of course. So people who value things like equity, they look at these posts and they judge your organization based on who you say you're looking for. And I've definitely done this. I definitely have judged organizations during my job seeking days. And clients and customers also are always watching. You always need to think about that. Like, are you sharing your values with the world? And so this is where the legal end of things is helpful to you, because the more you try to adhere to the spirit of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act and the Ontario Human Rights Code, as opposed to just kind of thinking about how to begrudgingly work within it, the more you attract exciting and diverse voices and ideas to your organization, and you assert those values publicly. So let people know what to expect in the process. More information is always better. That's like a mantra of mine. I always say that. More information is always better. If you know you'll take a long time to decide something, tell your candidates. It's better than having them get discouraged and potentially take something else. And then treat your candidates with respect right from the beginning. So show them you value them just like you would value them as employees. These are real people living their lives and going through a difficult time potentially as they navigate unemployment or career transitions. And in my recruiting at Keys, so recently we made the decision to compensate some external candidates. They were doing particularly in-depth work, which was performed for assessment prior to an interview. And our feeling was that, you know what? This is intellectual labor. They were doing something like evaluating a policy, right? So it's like they're putting their whole being into this. They're taking time out of their lives and they deserve to be compensated. And I think this gives candidates an idea of our values right away. So it shows them we're not the type of place where we expect something for nothing. And that's so important because people do not want to give that. And that we value fairness and compensation. So feedback for disposition candidates can be scary. but it doesn't have to be. Many times, barring a huge red flag incident during the interview, it's going to be something along the lines of experience that really makes the difference. And it's so often the case, especially when you screened and chosen your interview candidates very carefully. So if you do notice something a candidate could do to improve, then I think you should tell them. I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, we didn't choose you because you did X, but it's likely not that simple anyways. But I did notice that you did X, and I think it might help you come across more, whatever, if you worked on this. Um, of course, keys can help them with that as well. But remember that interview skills do not come naturally to many people. And so much of this is going to be trial and error, right? We don't usually go into university and take a class in interviewing. Maybe that should be something that people do, but usually it's not the case. So, this is going to be trial and error. This is going to be learning experience. And you really want to do what you can to help, because maybe this person's going to apply again and maybe they'll be right for a different role you have, right? Always keep those doors open and keep those relationships healthy. So let them know what you thought worked best for them in their interview. Say something positive, and then what you saw as possible areas for improvement as well. But don't hang them not getting the job on those factors alone. So you also want to be aware of biases during the interview stage. So we all have them, and we need to accept that right off the bat. It's unavoidable. Do you think your next associate has to be an extrovert? And Kyllie talked about, sometimes people get promotions. They're the loud people. They're the people who go and ask. And, we want to give space for different ways of being in the world. So do you think they have to be an extrovert because the person who's leaving always was and they were a star performer? Remember, the same job and tasks can be performed differently, but still successfully. And do you think this position has to be done by a woman because it's always been this way, something like that? It can be scary to admit to ourselves that we have these thoughts, but we need to be open to acknowledging them if we want to work against them. We all have our own unique set of prejudices as humans, and we need to dive deeper into these ideas and interrogate and interrupt these ways of thinking. So, returning to my driver's license pet peeve example. So you've never had someone work in this role without one. Okay, but what might this tell us about the disability status, socioeconomic status, etc. of past hires? And is this homogeneity helping the organization? I vote no, and I'll discuss this a little bit more later. So let's talk about inclusive culture and onboarding. As I've alluded to, demonstrate your community culture right away. If you value diversity or professionalism or commitment, you need to demonstrate this to new employees. So consider, as Kyllie suggested before, mentorship, a buddy program, which is a little less formal, to help employees connect with others in the organization and develop an awareness of your unique culture. Use your probation period. And, Kyllie said this as well. This is your chance to learn what to expect from an employee, but it's also their opportunity to learn what to expect from you, right? This is kind of like your extended job interview from them. How do you actually treat them once they're hired? Does everything change? Does all the politeness change to angry emails and demands? That's what they want to know, right? So if you fail to impress them, and you're likely to lose them to someone else who can offer the culture that they want. And this doesn't mean to be fake. You want them to know what to expect, but you also don't want to dump everything on them at once without proper scaffolding, support, training. So pair them with really good cultural ambassadors to your organization and appreciate the delicate and sometimes frightening place people are in when they start a new position, because we've all been there. Furthermore, the habits they develop now are likely to stick around, so make sure you show them how to live your values, as we discussed earlier. Check in frequently, and this is an important one. Don't be shy in raising concerns around performance. No one should be blindsided as the probation period comes to a close. So be kind and tactful, but make your expectations crystal clear. This is one instance where an over-the-top focus on being kind or gentle isn't really kind or gentle. Employees need to know where they stand, and they need a performance management program that reflects this. So frequent check-ins are wonderful opportunities to celebrate People I find they tend to be worried about things like performance management, but I always say, this is your opportunity to brag. This is your opportunity to make sure that your manager knows exactly what you've done and how wonderful you've been at doing it, right? All those little things that they might not have picked up on, which in a positive company culture, we hope they have, but it's just an extra opportunity to cement that and an opportunity for you to celebrate the things that are going right. And then you can also nip any issues in the bud. So DEI is a business and talent strategy when we embrace diversity as per the spirit of the Ontario Human Rights Code. So again, about diversity as a value in our organizations and not just, kind of figuring out how we can be compliant. We celebrate differences in, and I'm going to say them all: age, ancestry, color, race, citizenship, ethnic origin, place of origin, creed, disability, family status, marital status, gender identity, gender expression, record of offenses, sex, sexual orientation. But that should just be the minimum. So we gain a diversity of experience, opinion, values, philosophy, etc., which leads to a more dynamic living organization. So think about like a crop monoculture. We can't get very far with a monoculture of ideas. And so diversity allows organizations to adapt and change in positive ways that promote shared values and community. And it also lets clients and customers know that we value and respect them when our workforce looks like and represents the communities that it serves. So diversity creates great insight into what different client communities are looking for and how different people might respond to various policies, promotions, etc. All right, so let's move on to our key takeaways. Retention is driven by culture, flexibility, and transparency. So we talked so much about this transparency piece, and I think such a big part is feeling comfortable with the policies that you've created, that you've implemented, knowing that you're doing the right thing in terms of what works for your organization, and then being transparent about that, right? If you're not doing something bad, then you shouldn't need to hide it. It's kind of that philosophy. And then flexibility. So what can you do? Maybe, my examples were very much office work, like talking about getting up, taking breaks. Maybe you can't do that. Maybe you're in manufacturing, but you can try as much as you can to fit those moments for people to have a breath, for people to debrief, have the employee assistance program there to support employees outside of work. Pull those things in, and then look at all the ways in which you can be flexible, right? And I think it's such a normal human thing to go to the negative and to say, oh, we can't do that, but it's so much more enlightening and enjoyable to think about how could this role look different? How could we make this more flexible? What could we do here? And then culture. So nobody wants to work at a place where they don't feel like it aligns with their values. And you also don't want employees really whose values don't align with your workplace and with your organization. You want to have, we're co-creating a shared ideal and shared reasons for being there. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. Maybe it's not very lofty. Maybe you're trying to sell as much as possible of something, but you're still co-creating that culture together, and you're creating culture in how you treat your employees, how you put out job posts, how you treat members of the public, what you say and do, and everything contributes to this larger culture of employment within your organization. And then branding and DEI as competitive advantages. So obviously, I believe, and I think you should too, that DEI helps us to find that diversity of experience, of opinion, that allows an organization to thrive, allows it to adapt in a fast-paced way to a very rapidly changing environment, as Kyllie went over with, like, the labor market trends, etc. The best way we're going to get through this and all the struggles that we are facing economically is working together and having that plurality of voices in our organizations and new ideas, fresh ideas, and ways of looking at the world and ways of figuring out how to adapt.
Yeah, I think that's really it. Like you really sort of captured that idea that, the more sort of different ideas and voices you have, the more comfortable people feel in an environment, and then they're gonna stay, right? So really that idea of keeping people at the center of your process, right? I think sometimes the recruitment process can feel burdensome on both sides, right? It can feel really complicated, and that list that you just went through, I'm very glad that you didn't ask me to just on the spot, name it all, because that feels challenging, right? To remember it when you think of it sort of like theoretically like that. But
Mm.
when you think about it more as, oh no, it's about connecting with this person who is going to spend a lot of time with me and with my organization and with my team, and really, looking at it from a community perspective, that then allows you to say, okay, who is this person? How can I empower them? How can I help them grow? How can I help them develop? Then it feels less daunting for you as an employer, but it also feels more inviting and more, back to that word, authentic, for the job seekers. So I think that really sort of summarizes what Jaclyn and I are trying to capture today. And we really thank you for joining us for another Wisdom Wednesday. And I do look forward to hearing what the expertise of the community and in future Wisdom Wednesdays. Maybe we're watching you speak. But in the meantime, if you are looking for more information around mentorship programs or grants or any kind of support with training or with that upskilling piece that we talked about earlier, please don't hesitate to give Keys a ring, or check out any of our LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram profiles. Like Jaclyn said, we do all sorts of fun and engaging things out in the community, so you can follow along with that as well. So that's it for us, and yeah, until we talk to you again.
Thanks, everyone.